Welcome to today's Explainer. Today we're setting out on a seriously fascinating journey. We're going to impartially examine a really compelling linguistic breakdown of what is, without a doubt, one of the most world-famous texts in human history. Whether you grew up in a religious household or you've literally never stepped foot inside a church, you've almost certainly encountered this text. But as we're about to see, reading a translation is one thing, right? Actually understanding the original language, well, that's a whole different ballgame. So our goal today is to strip away centuries of cultural assumptions and look directly at what the source material actually tells us about the original Greek text. All right, so let's kick things off with a quick trip back in time. Picture this. The year is 2012. We're at the Super Bowl, arguably one of the most watched television events on the planet. Star quarterback Tim Tebow steps out onto the field, and painted right there on his eye black is John 3:16. And the result? Google actually reported a massive, record-breaking surge in searches for that exact phrase. Millions of people who didn't already know the verse by heart were just rushing to their keyboards to look it up. But the author of our source article points out this really fascinating dilemma. When people searched for it, they found the familiar English translation, which for many, well, it simply landed as a standard religious ultimatum, basically believe or face the consequences. And that brings us to the core question of today's Explainer. Do you actually know what the most famous Bible verse means? We've seen it everywhere, right? On bumper stickers, at sports stadiums, printed on coffee mugs, the whole shebang. And the English translation is so often interpreted by modern readers as this intense turn or burn ultimatum. But our source asks us to just hit pause for a second, take off our tradition-tinted glasses, and ask if that interpretation actually reflects the original first-century Greek text. Is it a threat, or is it something entirely different? To find out, here is our roadmap for today. First, the famous Bible verse. Second, redefining the word perish. Third, eternal life is now. Fourth, unveiling truth. And finally, restoration over condemnation. Let's get into it. Section 1, the famous Bible verse. A familiar text. So here it is. For God so loved the world, that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish, but have eternal life. Now, these words roll off the tongue with the certainty of a well-worn slogan, don't they? However, the source claims that, especially in evangelical traditions, we've often been forced to read these words through a pretty heavy lens of fear and afterlife anxiety. We just assume the words mean one thing because, well, we've heard them framed that way our entire lives. But as the article suggests, just because an interpretation is familiar doesn't mean it's necessarily correct. Moving on to Section 2, redefining the word perish, a lost translation. Okay, so when most people read the English word perish, their minds immediately jumped to a single conclusion, right? Eternal conscious torment. But the source points out that this actually is not the Greek word used in the original text. The original word is apolumi, which translates to destroy, ruin, or, importantly, to lose. The author neutrally explains that this is the exact same word used in the parables of the lost sheep and the lost coin. And think about those stories for a second. In those parables, the lost aren't tortured. They simply belong to the shepherd, and they are relentlessly sought after until they are found. So being lost or perishing means you're alienated in your own mind, you're suffering from a kind of spiritual amnesia, but you absolutely still belong to the one seeking you. Notice the stark contrast here. On one side, we have the traditional assumption, a forever burning hell, a final, ultimate death sentence. But on the other side, we have the author's argument based strictly on the original Greek. And that argument is that perishing is actually a present state of wandering. It's a self-inflicted ruin where a person is just totally alienated from the knowledge of who they truly are. The source argues that perish is a current state of being. It's not a future inescapable death sentence. It's literally the difference between living in reality versus walking around in self-inflicted darkness right here, right now. Which brings us to Section 3. Eternal life is now, a present reality. Now, most of us probably picture eternal life as heaven after death, right? Like an endless future in a better place. But the author details how the original text defines it completely differently, pointing specifically to another verse, John 17:3. According to the source, eternal life isn't simply living forever chronologically. Actually, scratch that. It's not about time at all. Rather, it is God's own quality of life. It's the act of knowing, experiencing, and living from union with the divine. It's an immediate, present tense reality that begins the very moment truth pierces a person's heart. And this brilliantly illustrates that timeline shift. Just look at the traditional view. It's a distant hope, a delayed prize you only get after you die.
Compare that to the original Greek perspective presented by the source, which sees eternal life as a present possession, experienced here and now. The author really emphasizes that the original text uses the present tense, as in, you have eternal life right now, not you will have eternal life later. The whole focus shifts entirely away from a delayed afterlife reward to the immediate, tangible reality of stepping out of darkness and into the light today.
So what does this present tense eternal life actually look like when it's planted within us? Well, the author points straight to the virtues found in Galatians 5. It looks like love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. The source argues that when we step into this life right now, these are the actual traits that blossom. We don't have to wait until we die to experience this profound quality of living. It's something that completely transforms our earthly experience in the present moment. All right, let's look at Section 4, Unveiling Truth, Rethinking Judgment. Now, when we hear the word judgment, what do we usually think of? Probably a courtroom, a gavel slamming down, and a harsh sentence being handed out. But let's look at the original Greek word, krisis. The source explains that krisis simply means a decision, a separation, or a distinguishing. It is the act of evaluating and making something clear. The author notes that it represents a decisive moment of revelation. It's a moment where truth is laid bare, rather than a word inherently meaning punishment or condemnation. It's like turning on the lights in a dark room. So the absolutely crucial point here is how this reframes the entire concept. The traditional view sees judgment as divine condemnation and wrath. But looking through the original Greek lens, the source argues that judgment is actually the unveiling of reality. It's pulling back the veil on darkness so humanity can finally see things as they truly are. It is the exposure of a soul's need for rescue, a diagnostic revealing of the truth, rather than a vengeful act of divine anger. Basically, the light simply exposes what was already hidden in the shadows. And that leads us into Section 5, Restoration over Condemnation. To support this grand conclusion, the source presents some pretty compelling textual evidence from John 6:39. This is the will of him who sent me, that of all that he has given me I lose nothing, but raise it up on the last day. The author argues that because the text claims all things were given to the Son, nothing and absolutely no one lies outside this reach. The core argument here is that the mission to seek and save the lost, those currently in a state of apolumi or ruin, will not fail. According to this perspective, everyone and everything will eventually be found, healed, and raised up. Which leads us to the source's ultimate conclusion. The turn or burn ultimatum is a myth. By looking at the original Greek words for perishing, eternal life, and judgment, the author concludes that John 3:16 was actually never meant to be an afterlife threat. No way. Instead, it is a gentle but urgent warning about the natural, present-day ruin of sin. It's an invitation to stop wandering around in self-inflicted alienation and to step into a restored, high-quality, present-tense union with the divine. And that leaves us with a really powerful question to ponder as we wrap up today's explainer. How does looking through the original Greek lens shift your understanding of the world's most famous verse? Whether you completely agree with the author's theological conclusions or not, it's pretty undeniable that going back to the roots of language can completely upend our culturally ingrained views. It forces us to ask whether we're actually reading the text or merely reading our own traditions into the text. Thank you so much for joining me to explore this fascinating linguistic breakdown. And hey, keep seeking the truth behind the words.